Indian consumers are calling for boycotts on American companies after US President Donald Trump announced 50% tariffs to be placed on Indian goods later this month. We begin by taking a look at the current India-US ties.
Back in 2019, Houston, Texas, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi addresses thousands of Indian Americans. Dubbed the Howdy Modi rally, the event reflected the growing importance of the Indian-American community and the closer ties between New Delhi and Washington. But now the Indian community in the US is worried.
India is getting punished for buying oil from Russia. I mean, what do we have to do with that? You know, we're stuck in the middle of the big boys fighting, I guess is what I call it. And India is a very strong country. You know, I don't think they will back down. You know, they're very resilient. They've come up in the last 4 or 5 years tremendously. And so I don't think they will bow down too much to President Trump's demands. Hopefully they can work it out, of course, but I don't think they will.
Just a few months ago, it seemed so different. The so-called bromance between US President Donald Trump and the Indian Prime Minister, fostered during Trump's first term, seemed to be surviving in his second administration.
We're going to talk about trade, we're going to talk about many things, but it's really an honor to see you, and you have been my friend for a long time, and congratulations on having done a great job.
Thank you.
But Trump's tariffs on friends and foes alike have fallen hard on India. New Delhi no doubt hoped to get favorable treatment, or at least the same tariff rates as other Asian allies received. But the 50% tariff rate set to take effect later this month is especially punitive. Trump's main trade advisor says India is too protectionist.
We send a lot of dollars overseas to India to buy their products in an unfair trade environment. India then uses American dollars to buy Russian oil. Russia then uses those American dollars that come from India to finance its armaments to kill Ukrainians. And then American taxpayers are then called upon to pay for the weapons that have to defend Ukraine against Russian armaments paid for by American dollars that came from India. That's got to stop.
It's not just about Russian oil. India, despite its rapid modernization, is still a nation of farmers, and according to negotiators, New Delhi has resisted opening up its agricultural sector to US imports. Many analysts describe this rift between New Delhi and Washington as the worst in many years. This tariff war has upended the relationship. The Indian public is largely calling for their government to respond. There are also calls to boycott US products and for New Delhi to move closer to its BRICS grouping with Brazil, Russia, China and South Africa, as well as other developing nations. Those in New Delhi who want to maintain strong relations with the US, however, are pushing for a direct meeting between Indian Prime Minister Modi and President Trump next month on the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly in New York, hoping perhaps the friendship between the two leaders can lead to some sort of compromise.
To talk about the geopolitical consequences of US tariffs on India, we're joined now by Vijay Prashad. He is Executive Director of the Tricontinental Institute for Social Research. Vijay, great to see you. Thanks for being with us.
Nice to see you. Thanks for having me.
So, Donald Trump is threatening India with huge tariffs if it continues to buy Russian oil. And he is also saying that India is, in a way, financing Russia's war against Ukraine. Implicit in that threat is a belief on the part of Trump and America that India does not have sovereign rights. It can't act on its own. It has to be told how it should behave. What do you make of this kind of coercion?
Yeah, I mean, look, firstly, any country has a right to have a discussion with countries it trades with about, how they want the trade to be managed within, since they are members of the World Trade Organization, the WTO rules. That's the framework of discussion. Nothing inappropriate for a country to say, look, we want to increase our tariffs against somebody. If there's a dispute, let's go to the WTO to settle that dispute. This happens all the time. This is a normal factor in interstate trade. But Mr. Trump isn't really engaged in interstate trade. He's using the, let's say, hammer of tariffs to batter countries into submission on various things. In this case, it's about, on the surface, it looks like it's about trying to push the Russians, perhaps put himself in a better position, he was hoping, when he meets Mr. Putin. It's not really about India-US trade. I mean, after all, Indian trade with the US, from the US standpoint, is not that large. It's important, but not that large. From the Indian standpoint, the US market continues to be important, and since 2023 has increased. But it's mainly a market for services. Now, services impacts a very small sector of the Indian economy. A very small number of people in terms of the numerical size of the people working in the high-tech sector. It is a high capital-intensive sector of the economy. There are large profits made there, but it doesn't really impact the largest part of the Indian working people, who provide services and goods to each other. So the tariffs is going to hit people, but largely it's going to hit the top section of society. And I don't know if Mr. Trump wants to turn that section, which has been historically the most pro-US section in the Indian population. I don't know if he wants to turn that section against the United States. That's pretty much where it's going.
Right, and in addition to that, I mean, Indian officials have pointed out that there's a great deal of hypocrisy in this demand by President Trump, or the threats that he is making. I mean, they've pointed out that the United States, for its part, continues to trade with Russia. It buys uranium from Russia to fuel its nuclear power plants. It also buys fertilizer from Russia as well, and other products. And then, of course, India, that imports the oil from Russia, continues to sell this oil to European countries which have sanctions against Russia.
Well, hypocrisy is the name of the game. I mean, look at the West, when it comes to Gaza, there's a genocide, an actual genocide going on here. We don't any longer know how many people are dead. Tens of thousands, 2 million people impacted, 2,000 people just killed at the food procurement sites. That's a lot more than were killed in the early phases in Libya. And yet, no rushing to the UN Security Council for a Chapter 7 resolution, for a no-fly zone, no discussion. The term no-fly zone hasn't even been uttered. So hypocrisy is the name of the game. By the way, you don't need to talk to me on this. You could just run clips from the Indian Foreign Minister, Mr. Jaishankar, who early into the period of Russia's entry into Ukraine told the Europeans, when he was asked by a journalist, he said, look, you're complaining about India buying oil from Russia. What we buy in a year, you buy in an afternoon. That was one of the best lines from an Indian high official. And now I think the Indians are quite correct to say to the United States, you're complaining about us. What about yourselves? I mean, India has to get low-priced oil into the country because otherwise starvation levels will increase.
But looking at the dispute itself, what kind of leverage does India have in resisting these threats?
Well, the greatest leverage India has, I think Mr. Modi has used pretty effectively, which is announced that I'm going for the Shanghai Cooperation Organization meeting in China. I'm going to meet President Xi Jinping, and we're going to talk about, perhaps, I hope personally, rapprochement on certain issues, lift the confidence between our two peoples. The United States has been using India since the pivot to Asia as an instrument against China. I mean, India was brought into the quadrilateral security group, the Quad, with Australia, Japan. This was the 4 countries, US, Japan, Australia, India. India has walked away from the Quad, which is why they've created the Squad with Philippines instead of India. So the United States, if it keeps pushing this, Mr. Modi is saying, well, we're going to backtrack from our isolate China campaign, and perhaps, and here I actually think it's a good move, we're going to try to create some sort of rapprochement, not only with China, but Pakistan. I think this would be a really good move. And I must say, the issue of Pakistan has also come up because high official of the Pakistani military goes to Florida and basically makes belligerent statements about India. Not a good sign for the United States to host somebody who then comes to US territory and verbally attacks another country. not a very good sign for that, message taken in India. And so India is going to seek to use what I think of as the only leverage. It's not economic leverage, but to say, well, maybe we will start to talk to Beijing, and maybe it's time for a little Asian solidarity.
But India does have economic leverage, doesn't it? And this could be coming from the Indian people themselves. I mean, there have been demonstrations throughout India against these new US policies. There have also been calls for consumers in India to start boycotting American products. I mean, could these threats from the United States really backfire really badly, hurting US business interests rather than forcing India into some kind of new trade policy in terms of its purchase of oil from Russia?
Well, Mr. Modi came to power, after his second election win, saying "Make in India," that we need to make more things in India. In fact, that was a hollow claim, because what they were doing was they were importing almost finished products and finishing them in India and saying it's made in India. Maybe this will actually push India to develop a greater manufacturing capacity, but that's going to require a real push from whatever government is there in India, whether Mr. Modi's government lasts or somebody else. It's going to take them a lot of political leverage against the very wealthy in India to actually invest in manufacturing. They've enjoyed themselves, the very wealthy in India have enjoyed themselves getting rich government contracts, giveaway from government banks, at fire sale prices, buying infrastructure like ports and so on. Well, they're going to be, I think, told, you better go and set up manufacturing. There's demand now in India. People don't want to import, blue jeans and so on from the US. Start making all that stuff in India. Maybe with rapprochement from China, it won't be so inappropriate to import Chinese goods and sell them in the Indian market. There is always that as well. And we shall see what happens. But early days, people going on the street and saying, stop buying US goods. It's early days. India has been through this before. This was the Swadeshi campaign against British goods. Will it happen again? I'm not sure.
There are also some analysts who believe that there is a broader goal or another goal in these threats against India from Donald Trump, and that is to undermine the BRICS group. India is a member of the BRICS group, to try and split the BRICS group. Of course, these countries, of course, now we have the expanded BRICS. There are other developing countries in the group as well. Do you think that this is partly the goal that's driving US policy?
I don't agree at all, because India has already been the laggard in the BRICS group. I think this is Mr. Trump trying his best to secure some kind of agreement with the Russians. I think he's putting a lot of pressure on Russia. We're going to have to see how their summit goes, Mr. Trump and Mr. Putin, because I think that Mr. Trump is continuing to attempt the reverse Kissinger strategy. The United States understands unity between Russia and China is fatal for the United States and Europe, because these two countries will operating together, and if India joins them, become a real economic powerhouse, which is going to make Europe seem like a big player on the Eurasian continent. And Kissinger understood this. He had the Kissinger strategy, which was to befriend China and isolate Russia. That's why he insisted that Richard Nixon go to China. That's the Kissinger strategy. Mr. Trump is attempting the reverse Kissinger, befriending Russia to break the no limits partnership with China. That's what he's trying to do. He's trying to put pressure on Russia. Will he succeed? Look, the Russians understand that after all these years, the way the United States and Europe has treated Russia, the days of wanting to be the 8th country in the G7, the G8, those days are over. The no limits partnership is real. On the other hand, there is a section in Russian elite society. They have their money tied up in European and US banks. They would like a rapprochement with the West so they can get their money back. They would prefer to look westward rather than eastward. This is a debate and dispute within Russia, but I feel like, that bridge has been blown up, and I think it's going to be difficult. It would please me greatly to see Russia, China, and India collaborate to bring peace between China and India, peace between India and Pakistan and increase trade and development across Asia. It would bring me a great sense of calm to see that, but I'm not sure it's that easy to have all those things happen.
Vijay Prashad, thanks so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
For more on India-US relations and their impact on the global economy, we are now joined here in Washington, D.C. by Chidanand Rajghatta. He is the foreign editor and US bureau chief for the Times of India. Also here in Washington, D.C. is Michael Kugelman. He is a senior fellow at the Asia-Pacific Foundation of Canada. Welcome to both of you. Chidanand, let me start with you. This spat between the United States and India, it's escalated very quickly. I mean, what are your thoughts on it? Do you see it being contained very quickly, or could it lead to, deeper damage in the relationship?
Well, it depends. Thank you, Anand, for having me. It depends on how both sides handle it. My sense is that it's hit an air pocket, rather than careening towards a crash. And it primarily, has to do with the whole trade and tariff issue. It began from that. And the way I look at it, the reason that's happened is, Mr. Trump, President Trump, wants very quick results, and India is notoriously slow. It's a complicated society. It's a difficult thing to navigate terms with its own population, with the domestic constancy. And also, Modi, the Prime Minister Modi, has not been sufficiently deferential to Mr. Trump. I think President Trump. I think President Trump likes foreign leaders to come and sort of bow and scrape in the White House, in the Oval Office, and big countries don't do that. Not India, not China, and not Brazil. There are a lot of smaller countries, and maybe Europeans do that. But Mr. Modi, Prime Minister Modi, has to address his domestic constancy, and no Indian Prime Minister, let alone Mr. Modi, can be seen as being deferential to the United States. And then there's a larger issue of Russia and BRICS. I think President Trump has expressed his concern very openly about BRICS and what it is up to. He fears that the dollar is being diminished, that BRICS countries are going to de-dollarize. And so India is having to pay the price for associating with BRICS. And also, of course, the biggest piece now is buying Russian oil. The fact that India buys Russian oil, and according to Mr. Trump, that funds Russia's war against Ukraine, although China is a bigger buyer of Russian oil. The Europeans buy Russian gas, the Turks buy Russian fertilizer. But I think India has been singled out for punitive measures simply because it's easier to make an example out of India, and there's a lot of noise and public outrage in India. So he has basically weaponized tariffs to punish India.
Right.
But my sense is if the Russia-U.S. talks goes well in Alaska, and things de-escalate on the Ukraine front, you might find this blowing over pretty quickly.
Michael Kugelman, how do you see this? I mean, is this a deep rift? There is some speculation that it's actually just a negotiating tactic on the part of Trump to try and get some kind of better deal out of India.
Oh, this is a very serious crisis for the relationship. Certainly not the worst. I mean, many of us will recall that during the latter decades of the Cold War, the U.S.-India relationship was very troubled. And then if you look at the late 90s, soon after India formally became a nuclear weapons state, that led to sanctions and a pretty significant crisis in U.S.-India relations. But over the course of the last 20 years or so, where you've had a period of strategic partnership, I can think of no other time when you had a crisis this serious. And one reason for it is the trust factor. I think that many in Washington don't understand just how unhappy so many officials are in New Delhi about the state of the relationship right now, don't realize how upset officials are in India about the moves and the messaging coming from President Trump, and I think it could take some time to recoup that trust. I agree with Chidu that a lot of the issue comes down to Trump's tariff position, and as we know, he's always been very unhappy about Indian tariffs going back to his first term, and then when he was on the campaign trail for his reelection, he referred to India as a tariff king. And India's tariffs are high, certainly not as high as a number of other countries that are close partners of the U.S. But I think that's something that Trump had been fixated on for a long time. And when he saw that India was not willing to roll over and make all of the concessions that the Trump administration was seeking, that clearly impacted the relationship. But I think two signposts to look to in terms of what can happen to this relationship. The two sides are going to continue to negotiate. They're going to continue to try to get a deal. If they can somehow get a deal, a trade deal, which will be tough, that would be a confidence booster right there. And secondly, the Quad is very important for the U.S.-India relationship, and there is a summit scheduled for New Delhi later this year. So long as that happens, that could be helpful for the relationship as well.
Chidanand, to Michael's point on how seriously trust has been undermined, could this have a longer-term impact?
I doubt very much. Like Michael said, periodically, there's been troughs in this relationship, notably during, the nuclear tests in the late 90s. And I go back, I'm old enough to remember the 1970s crisis when, during the liberation of Bangladesh, when President Nixon sided with Pakistan. And India has the ability to ride this out. I don't think, things are as serious. India-US trade, although President Trump dismissed it as, minuscule or negligible, is actually pretty large. India is the 9th largest trading partner of the United States. The bilateral trade is 135 billion. They aim to reach 500 billion by 2030, and there's a massive engagement, people-to-people engagement, between the two countries. There are 5 million Indian people of Indian origin in the United States. No other country comes even close to this, and so people-to-people ties are strong. And remember, through all the wrangling about tariffs and Russian oil, yada, 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 the US and India were actually doing a joint space mission out of India right in the middle of all this. So there is a strong people-to-people engagement. There's strong ties in science and technology. So I don't see a lasting impact. There may be a temporary trough. And look, at the end of the day, Mr. Trump is going to be in the White House for what? Another 1,200 days, 1,250 days? And I think India and US relations have seen a lot more. The thing is, the tariff, like I said, Mr. Trump wants instant results. He's showy. If the Indians had come to the White House and announced that we are going to invest $500 billion in the US over the next, 5 years or 10 years, that would have sort of mollified him, which is what a lot of countries did without providing any details whatsoever. I've never seen details of Japanese investment or European EU investment. The Indians don't do that. They're more calculated. They want everything in writing, signed, sealed, delivered. Most of the U.S.-India joint declarations and joint statements run into 5,000 words. They're very wordy and verbose. Mr. Trump he wants quick results. He's temperamental. He's impatient. He wants it now, and he wants the headlines. And then, of course, there's the other issue of him wanting a Nobel Prize, which he has very transparently, expressed a desire for. And the Indians just haven't, come up with that or supported him for that.
Okay.
So he keeps repeating this whole thing of I made peace between India and Pakistan, and therefore I deserve the Nobel Prize. And that's another little sticking point between the two countries. But I expect all this to pass, in the weeks and months to come.
Okay, I want to get to the Pakistan factor in just a moment. But Michael, I want to get back to something that you were talking about, and the fact that India is also a strategic ally of the United States. It's a member of the Quad as well. Does that, in a sense, give India some leverage?
Well, it should, but clearly, President Trump, with the very rigidly transactional lens that he applies to foreign policy, is not necessarily going to be impacted. His thinking won't necessarily be impacted by how close strategically the U.S. might be to these countries. And we've seen, not just now, but in his first term too, I mean, he really alienated a lot of close U.S. strategic partnerships, not with India. The relationship was pretty good during his first term, but with other countries, whether it comes to concerns with NATO partners about burden sharing, or indeed concerns about trade. And clearly President Trump is not afraid to slap tariffs on close partners of the U.S., including strategic partners. Another thing that makes things a bit more difficult to assess now is that, yes, one could argue that the U.S.-India has that strategic convergence to bounce back on. As you know, I mean, they both have taken very similar positions toward the issue of China and the challenges that Beijing poses to both the U.S. and India. But India has been very quietly but consistently trying to ease its tensions with China in recent months, going back to before Trump was reelected. Likewise, President Trump has been rather vague about his intentions with China, and sometimes he says he wants to pursue competition, but other times he's talked about wanting to cooperate with President Xi. So
Yeah.
that suggests that maybe the U.S.-India relationship is not quite as strategically sound at the moment as some think it is.
Right.
But that said, I mean, the strategic convergence there, I think that certainly helps. And as Chidu said as well, this is a multifaceted partnership, and there
Yeah.
are so many different areas where the two could work together that can be insulated from tensions in the broader relationship.
Chidanand, let's talk about the Pakistan factor, which you mentioned a moment ago. I mean, while this confrontation between India and the United States festers, the United States is also making some moves to get closer to India's arch rival in the region, that is Pakistan. Trump says he wants to develop Pakistan's oil reserves, and the Pakistanis, for their part, are saying that they're willing to make investments here in the United States. I mean, do you see any kind of significant rebalancing of the U.S. relationship with these two rivals?
Yeah, I mean, I see short-term tactical, adjustments. I mean, to be honest, every decade or so, every couple of decades, the U.S. reaches out to some Pakistani general to make short-term adjustments. This goes back to General Ayub Khan in the 60s, Yahya Khan in the 70s, Ziaul Haq in the 80s, Musharraf in the 90s, and then Kiani in the 2010s, and now Asim Munir. This is just, tactical. They need Pakistan. There are two reasons why the White House could be courting Pakistan a little more ardently now, after about 20 years in isolation, between Obama, Bush, and Biden. And that's because, A, they want to try and wean Pakistan away from China yet again. And they also need Pakistan's help. In the old days, it used to be Afghanistan, which was why Pakistan was relevant. And now my sense is they need Pakistan against Iran. So beyond that, in a fundamentally economic, science, technology, or people-to-people way, Pakistan really has very little traction in the U.S.
A little bit of time left. Michael Kugelman, you were quoted in the Irish Times as saying, what's happening in U.S.-Pakistan relations is a surprise. I would describe the relationship now as one that's enjoying an unexpected resurgence, even a renaissance. Pakistan has very successfully understood how to engage with such an unconventional president. Talk to us about that. What led you to that view?
Yeah, I think that was originally in the Financial Times. I mean, basically, what I argue is that Pakistan. We talk about the U.S. trying to cultivate Pakistan. I think this is a case of Pakistan reaching out to the Trump administration, tapping into the issues that it knows this administration is very interested in pursuing, not just in Pakistan but globally. And that includes, as was mentioned before, critical minerals, crypto. I would argue that Pakistan has very successfully positioned itself as a useful partner to this administration to help it pursue these commercial opportunities that it seeks. I mean, soon after the administration took office, Pakistan hosted this large global critical minerals forum and invited a senior U.S. delegation to come. They came, and now they're talking about that. So things are going well now. This has caused a lot of excitement and happiness in Islamabad, but I think down the road we could see a reversion to the norm in terms of what we've seen in recent years with U.S.-Pakistan relations, which is for there to be a friendly, workable relationship, but not a very active one.
Okay, and that's where we need to leave it. Thanks to both of you for being with us. That is it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington.